Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the Better Evidence Project today as we host a very important and very timely event. My name is Dr. Christina Hook. I am the Executive Director of the Better Evidence Project in the Center for Peacemaking Practice at George Mason University's Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution. First, a word of housekeeping is that we have now opened our question and answer format for our speakers. You can write any questions that you have throughout the event in the button at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. So for those of you who are joining the Better Evidence Project for the first time, please allow me to extend a warm word of welcome to you. The Better Evidence Project was founded in February 2020 to gather together practitioners, policymakers, scholars, and donors around urgent topics of war prevention and mitigation. We join with our colleagues throughout these fields in pushing for a broader movement of evidence-based peacemaking. We're particularly eager to welcome the voices of local people who are experiencing conflict, and that's why we are grateful to welcome our distinguished speakers to today's event. First of all, I want to welcome Laurence Broers, who will be moderating today's conversation. Laurence is the South Caucasus Program Director at the London-based peacebuilding organization Conciliation Resources. He has more than 20 years experience as a researcher of conflicts in the South Caucasus and a practitioner of peacebuilding initiatives in the region. He is also the author of Armenia and Azerbaijan, Anatomy of a Rivalry, which was published in 2019 by Edinburgh University Press. He is the co-editor of the Routledge Handbook of the Caucasus, published last year, and numerous other publications and analytic pieces on urgent issues in the region. Welcome, Laurence. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christina, and welcome to all participants and panelists. I welcome this very important discussion at a truly difficult moment in Armenia's history as it confronts the consequences of last year's defeat in a catastrophic war. Dealing with these consequences is currently playing out on the streets of Yerevan, making it all the more urgent to discuss prospects for the non-violent resolution of contentious politics, a question which resonates with both the story of Armenia's domestic politics over the last quarter century and, of course, its relationship with Azerbaijan. It's the latter focus that is our focus, latter dimension, sorry, that is our focus today. Again, an urgent and timely one as peace building in the Armenian-Azerbaijani context goes through a crisis of relevance and results. Peace building in this context has long had its detractors, and these have surely now been emboldened by the fact that what 26 years of diplomatic efforts were unable to change, 6 weeks of military action were able to radically transform. So it's this stark state of affairs that brings us to the questions that we'll be discussing today. Is there space for peace building in Armenia? What are the prospects for healing, resilience, and dialogue without implying any linear relationship between these phenomena? To discuss these questions, we have a distinguished and very experienced panel. The format for this session will be that each speaker has 10 to 12 minutes to make remarks. We will then open up the floor to questions via the Q&A box that's in the Zoom interface. So to ask questions, please type your question into that box and indicate whether your question is for one or all panelists. I'll be gathering questions into rounds that we will put to our panelists to answer and comment on. Panelists, I will let you know at 10 minutes that you have 2 minutes remaining, and I ask you please to keep to time. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, His Excellency Varuzhan Nersisyan, who is currently the ambassador of Armenia to the United States. He was appointed by Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan in November 2018. Prior to his appointment as ambassador, Varuzhan Nersisyan served as an assistant to the Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia, and he holds a master's degree from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy in Boston. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Broers. Thank you very much, Christina, and George Mason University Better Evidence Project for this invitation and for this timely discussion on this very acute topic of the post-war situation in and around Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. In a search for thoughts and ideas about the prospects of the further resolution of the conflict. And of course, as I started to prepare for this discussion, I take a look at your very important book published last year, Mr. Brewers, The Anatomy of Rivalry, which unfortunately has not been ended so far. The paradigm of rivalry, unfortunately, goes on up until now. And the conflict is not resolved, notwithstanding that some try to claim that the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is resolved. No matter how much I wish that conflict was resolved, and of course resolved peacefully and comprehensively, the conflict unfortunately is not resolved, and it's gone even deeper. It is in a deeper frozen condition, and we don't know what is going to happen next. So this war exacerbated and exaggerated the existing situation even further. Although Azerbaijan claims that it has achieved the victory, but it has not achieved the victory on this comprehensive solution of the conflict, and it cannot achieve a victory because a victory is a solution which is a win-win solution for all the stakeholders in this conflict. Right now, this is not a win-win solution. This is the November 9-10 agreement is merely a ceasefire agreement. It is not a comprehensive solution. We can talk about a comprehensive solution whenever we find a comprehensive solution to the root cause of this conflict, namely to the outstanding issue of the status of Nagorno-Karabakh. We can pretend that the issue is resolved. We can pretend or take an ostrich position or policy towards the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict as the international community and say, well, the issue is resolved. However, one day or another, you figure out that the issue demonstrates itself in a different dimension, in a different way. So what happened on September 27th was, along with Azerbaijan's consistent policy of war rhetoric, militancy, of military solution to this conflict, and ultimately Azerbaijan opted. We did have, as the countries of the region, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Nagorno-Karabakh, we did have a chance to resolve this issue, and the issue did not find a peaceful resolution because Azerbaijan wanted, and on top of up until now wants, to resolve this issue on the basis of unilateral compromises, but not on the basis of mutual compromises and addressing the root cause of this conflict. And Azerbaijan, together with Turkey, launched an unprecedented military attack against a tiny little enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh Republic, or of Artsakh Republic. And 44 days of this heroic war that the Nagorno-Karabakh armed forces resisted this unprecedented aggression of two armies, of jihadist terrorists, of Turkish drones, of all kinds of drone swarms attacking Nagorno-Karabakh, will remain in the history of warfare to be studied from a different perspective. But also, so when Azerbaijan today is bragging around and saying that Azerbaijan celebrates a victory, it cannot say that it's the victory of Azerbaijani armed forces, because the world knows that Turkey and jihadist terrorists were fighting on behalf of Azerbaijan in this war. So this is not the victory of Azerbaijani armed forces. And without Turkish military support, Azerbaijan was not going to be able to advance militarily. But we have what we have on the ground, and we have to take the situation definitely in the perspective. But we cannot hide from the existing issue. We cannot, Azerbaijan cannot hide and say that the conflict is right now is resolved. The conflict is not resolved, and we're hoping and expecting that under the auspices of the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs, it will be still possible to address and find, whenever time is mature, a comprehensive solution that respects the rights of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, definitely, to self-determination and to express their human rights, and also the deoccupation of the Nagorno-Karabakh. The parts that are currently under occupation of Azerbaijan have never been in the previous stages of negotiation, and this is not the representative of Armenia saying the world knows, the international community knows, that never have been at stake. Neither the Hadrut region, which is currently occupied by Azerbaijan, nor the town of Shushi have been a part in any way or form discussed as to be, to be a part of Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan, by gross violation of international law, not only conducted an unlawful attack against the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, but also occupied parts which have never been a part of the discussion. So right now, of course, these issues are at stake: the deoccupation of Nagorno-Karabakh and the issue of the comprehensive settlement of this conflict. Azerbaijan has been talking for more than 20 years about the occupation of its territories, which Armenia never claimed that there are Armenian territories, by the way. Armenia has viewed these territories as a part of the comprehensive negotiations. Whenever the issue of the status would have been addressed, the issues of the territories were going to be definitely considered in a certain logic under the understandings achieved within the Minsk Group co-chairs format. So right now, Azerbaijan, which have been complaining about the occupation of its territories, it occupies the territories of Nagorno-Karabakh. And Nagorno-Karabakh has never been itself a part of Azerbaijan, except from the part of the Soviet Union, where it has been unlawfully, and I stress this word deliberately, unlawfully incorporated by simple decision of Joseph Stalin to Soviet Azerbaijan. So according to international law, Nagorno-Karabakh has never been a part of Azerbaijan, except the part of the Soviet Union, which is illegal. Therefore, the issue is still ahead of us. Unfortunately, we have to, when we talk about the reconciliation right now, when we talk about the peace building in Armenia, we have to understand that it takes two to tango. Armenia is in a difficult situation, and Nagorno-Karabakh after this war, of course. But when we talk about reconciliation, we need to understand that it takes two to tango. Right now, when Azerbaijan refuses to address the humanitarian issue of the Armenian prisoners of war in Azerbaijani captivity right now, unlawfully, in violation of November 19 statement, Azerbaijan keeps Armenian prisoners of war and artificially tries to depict them as terrorists or saboteurs, which is completely, one can laugh at this type of attitude that they're trying to present the prisoners of war, which have been captured some 10 days after the war, to present them as terrorists. And by the way, Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh returned those Azerbaijani who were indicted, two of them, and they were imprisoned because they killed people in Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenia returned all of the prisoners of war and the criminals who were in Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenia returned, but Azerbaijan refuses, and they keep the Armenian prisoners of war as bargaining chips in their hands, trying to, every time they return, each group of 5 people, to negotiate and to trade over this. It's completely against all humanitarian norms and principles to bargain over the human destinies. And this is what we're seeing in Azerbaijan. This is what we are seeing. Moreover, the inhuman treatment. I mean, the internet is flooded when Azerbaijani armed forces, encouraged by their own government, have been torturing in an inhuman manner that is unprecedented. It's not seen in the history of warfare. Perhaps one of the things that will be reminded, the unfortunate things about this war, it will remain as a shame for any armed forces to have such an attitude, such an inhuman attitude towards the military of the opposite army. We have seen in the military of history different types of warfare, but one has not seen an armed forces torturing the representative of the other armed forces. We have seen terrorists decapitating people, but not the representatives of the regular armed forces. So this is what we have seen. Decapitations, torture, inhuman treatment of Armenian military. And right now, we do not know what's the condition of the remaining Armenian prisoners of war in Azerbaijan. So to talk about reconciliation, it's premature, Mr. Brewers, in this context when Azerbaijan holds Armenian prisoners of war, and when Azerbaijani president, encouraged by President Erdogan of Turkey, at the military parade presents territorial claims towards the Republic of Armenia. How we can talk about genuine reconciliation, about true reconciliation when Azerbaijani leadership lays territorial claims towards the modern Republic of Armenia, not only towards Nagorno-Karabakh.
2 minutes, please, Your Excellency.
Yes, sir. At the same time, how we can talk about the reconciliation when Turkey and Azerbaijan are planning to construct a Grey Wolves school in Shushi, an organization which is famous for its neo-fascist ideology and ideology of pan-Turkism. Or another example, how, to talk about the peace, that the absurdity of the situation has gone so far that the Azerbaijani president announces that Armenia shouldn't have army, and Azerbaijan in the meantime should have the best army and should have the best military equipment. Well, for the Mr. President, we should say that no matter what is the wishful thinking in Azerbaijan, Armenia did have, Armenia has, and Armenia will have armed forces to defend the Republic of Armenia, to defend, including the Republic of Artsakh, and to defend the Armenian interests. We do have the right, and this is not disputed, but this just illustrates the situation, to what extent Azerbaijan and Turkey have exacerbated the situation. So in this environment, to talk about reconciliation, I think is too early. Of course, I wish we had a much better environment and much better circumstances to discuss a genuine peace in the region. But right now, with this moods in Ankara and in Baku, I do not see anytime soon happening a genuine reconstruction. Of course, we are committed to the peace. We are committed to a peaceful solution, but at the same time, I just wanted to underline that the Nagorno-Karabakh issue can be considered resolved only when the issue of the fundamental outstanding issue of the status of Nagorno-Karabakh is addressed and resolved in a manner satisfying. When Azerbaijan says that there is no status issue and the citizens of Nagorno-Karabakh are their own citizens, they are deeply mistaken, because they should first bother to ask the people of Nagorno-Karabakh whether they want to be a part of Azerbaijan or not. And it is exactly for that reason that the co-chairs of the OSCE Minsk group had worked out the fundamental proposal of the referendum in Nagorno-Karabakh that was supposed to provide a legally binding will, expression of will for the people of Nagorno-Karabakh as an outstanding, as a way forward and as a solution. So if we want to achieve a genuine peace in this region, one cannot pretend that the issue is not resolved. One should understand that no matter how many petrodollars are in Azerbaijani military budget, it cannot suppress the fundamental issue or the fundamental human rights, collective human rights of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. And sooner or later, they have the right to express and to exercise their right to self-determination. Only then we can have a comprehensive solution to Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. With this, Mr. Moderator, I know that you are getting a little anxious, so I will limit my comments and I will just have the floor back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for these introductory remarks. I would now like to turn to our second panelist. Dr. Gevorg Ter-Gabrielyan is an international development leader and writer with more than 30 years experience of working in transitional countries from the Balkans to Central Asia, but with a focus on Armenia. He has been the executive director of the Eurasia Partnership Foundation in Armenia since 2007, leading and implementing large-scale developmental and informal educational projects. He has also worked as Eurasia Program Manager and Senior Policy Advisor for the Peacebuilding NGO International Alert here in London. He is also a prolific author across multiple fields and genres spanning fiction, academic and popular science writing. Gevorg, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laurence. Hi, everybody. I know the time is limited, so I'll just make a few remarks. In fact, I want to make 3 points, and they may seem somehow away from each other, distant from each other, but if you imagine a map and 3 points, and then you can map, kind of connect the dots as much as possible, maybe during the discussion or whatever. Point number 1, I think it was put very well by the 3 authors who just recently published an article in epress.am site. 3 women, Anna Shahnazarian, Arif Martirosyan, and I may not remember her name, Galfayan. The article is very rich and provides a very different approach to the entire story about the conflict. But it has one point which I want to share, which is that let's face the trauma. The thing that happened from November 9th onwards is that the political crisis, the need to deal with the consequences of the war, the internet noise, it all somehow affects the society in Armenia and makes everybody to be busy with something and to somehow like bury the fact that we're all in a huge trauma. To deal with the trauma, to face it, not to shy away from it, is one of the maybe ways to somehow to understand what has happened and not to repeat it, maybe, possibly. In fact, it is in a way similar to what happened after the First War, because the so-called victory, quote unquote, in the hot part of the war in '94, created a situation, and also the lack of internet at that time, the lack of easy connection between people, created a situation that the trauma of the war has not been dealt with. And this had its huge consequences on the entire story which came afterwards. The second point that I want to make is expressed by one of a very good friend of mine, former beneficiary of our projects, and then a partner, and currently somebody who is studying for PhD in peace and conflict studies somewhere in Scandinavia, I think in Uppsala, Aliq Media. And he said recently at a closed discussion when we were discussing like this one, but just it was closed, when we were discussing what to do about the conflict, he said the conflict transformation methodologies that have been used by us, like our organization, Eurasia Partnership Foundation, maybe some others, not a very large group of practitioners, are good for helping individuals, but they do not affect the society, the chances for peace of the society. I think this is presenting in a nutshell the issue that we have been facing all the time throughout the years in this as well as many other conflicts, when they say that the civil society or NGO or grassroots attempts to transform the conflict are not bringing about any substantial results. What they mean is that they do not affect policies most of the time, or affect very little and insufficiently. But in terms of the individual effect, I think this is true as well, because we can see, I can see many of our beneficiaries which faced the war, some of them in the very heat of the war, who dealt with the situation very well. They faced the situation, they didn't shy away from it, they expressed themselves freely, and they continue on now being constructive, capable of action, as different from many others who are in a deep frustration. So the question is, why is it that these methodologies do not affect the societies and the peace processes? Obviously, for a reason which is very contrary to the situation we're facing right now here in this discussion. Because this is one of the rarest cases where the government representative is in the same discussion with people like me, people who don't have any official position. And these kind of settings have been almost absolutely absent in the previous decades. Of course, there have been situations when there was a conference, a debate, a discussion between organized by civil society or by academics, and the government representatives were there. But this wasn't a situation of a brainstorming. This wasn't a situation of equality. There have been also some cases where the government representatives asked people to come over, but this was again a very top-down situation. The real discussion of options and the real planning and strategizing together has not taken place either obviously in Armenia or in Azerbaijan for the entire duration of the conflict. And it is still absent today, even more perhaps than it was after the 2018 April Revolution. One of the other presenters who is sitting here, Arsen Kharatyan, is the one who was in the government and left very fast, but at the little period when he was there, that was the way I saw the opportunity to have these kind of discussions, but it never happened. So this separation from each other of the state and governmental dealing with the conflict versus the non-governmental dealing with the conflict has been one of the huge impediments. And of course, again, it is related to the fact that the sides mirror each other. So because in Azerbaijan, it's possible even less than in Armenia. In Armenia, it hasn't happened either, but I think that's very wrong. Of course, that this also means changing somehow the balance between confidentiality and transparency of the discussions around the conflict, but it could have been done. It has never been done. And the last point, which is more complex, and I will it is comprised of, I'm trying to somehow to think what could be the theoretical framework of approaching the situation, and of course, behind everything I say is an action somehow hidden, right? I mean, you can address the issues that exist. So I think one of the things that have to be done is to analyze the entire history of the conflict, and but to analyze from a slightly different perspectives, like the three women that I mentioned wrote this article. Not to take for granted the frameworks, the conceptualizations that these official sites are presenting as the framework, the conceptualization of the conflict. And when I try to analyze it like that, then I come up with the two interrelated frameworks. One is the political economy framework. What happened was that during and after the first conflict, the first war, a criminal oligarchic regime came to power in Armenia. And this regime was, of course, the reason why it came to power was also partly related to the conflict, because many of those who fought in the conflict came with a kind of an attitude that the society owns them and has to pay with opportunities, power, ownership, kind of away, apart from all of the rules that exist. So this criminal oligarchic regime solidified, and it was in its vested interest to promote the nationalist, the extreme nationalist ideology, which I call ethnopia. It's a term which is comprised of ethnos and utopia. So this ethnopistic ideology, which meant rewriting textbooks, remapping the maps, changing the names of the territories, ethnonyms, toponyms, etc., and raising new generations who have been raised in this atmosphere of ethnopia, where truth and mythology, truth and myth have been combined. So it's very difficult to distinguish one from the other. And therefore, this ideology was very much in the interest of the oligarchic regime, because it gave them a chance to exploit and milk the population and the territories in the name of the conflict. And whenever one tried to challenge, say, criticize the way the conflict is construed, criticize even just the oligarchs themselves, the reply was, this is a national security matter.
2 minutes, please, Gevorg.
Yeah. So on one hand, it was this mechanism. On the other hand, the zero-sum situation between the conflicting sides, the mirroring of each other and the building the enemy images of each other. And the worst thing was, and the most important thing to understand is, that every time when somebody tried to challenge this ethnopistic ideology, there was another person who could bring about a fact, an objective truth about the animosity of the other side, about the fact that the other side wants this side to be wiped off the face of the earth. There was these stories, be that from this side or from that side, Sumgait, Khojalu, people displaced, people with axe killing other people, etc. So these two frameworks, the political economy, which makes the conflict very much in the interest of those in power and of the oligarchs, and the zero-sum game being built up by the sides, is something to tackle. If we are able to analyze this seriously and find people of different origins in Azerbaijan, Turkey, internationally, to analyze together, maybe we will understand something about this conflict, and therefore maybe we will be able to find some ideas how to deal with it from now on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gevorg, for these comments. Our next panelist is Arsen Kharatyan. He is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Armenian Georgian media platform, Aliq Media. He served as advisor on foreign policy issues to Nikol Pashinyan during the first 100 days after the Velvet Revolution, of 2018. Prior to that, he worked at the Voice of America in Washington and the German Technical Cooperation, coordinating public participation in Armenia's poverty reduction strategy. Arsen is one of the 7 founders of Armenia's Civil Contract Party, and from the late 1990s up until the Velvet Revolution, he was co-founding and leading a number of different pro-democracy movements in Armenia. Arsen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laurence. Thank you very much, and thank you for this, for agreeing and being with us today. I want to, of course, start by also thanking my dear school, George Mason University, which is sort of a home for me as I was working and doing my degree in conflict resolution years ago. Of course, I want to thank Christina and all the organizers, including Margarita Tadevosyan, who worked tirelessly to bring this together. First of all, the 2 presentations that we heard are very, I think, important. Our ambassador has laid out at least where we stand as a country, as a state, and my good friend and colleague Gevorg Ter-Gabrielyan tried to tackle the issue from the angle of the civil society, maybe, or academia, or whatever we are. We together, actually, with you, Laurence, and Gevorg, who have years of experience in being involved in track 2 diplomacy, and try to bring together some other options or solutions, or find creative solutions. But I will have to admit that it seems like, let's say, the 2 or 3 decades of that work has been diminished to the degree that we have an existential crisis. I think we have an existential crisis as practitioners. I think we have existential crisis as civil societies that have been talking to each other, and I feel it on myself. I cannot really get into any kind of discussion with Azerbaijani colleagues, whether it's academic floors or others. And part of the big reasons is very clear for me. I was being invited to several possible debates, and our precondition, if you wish, call it whatever you want, is to release our prisoners of war and or denounce that officially and openly. If there are people who are engaged or are interested in being engaged in peace building in the future, whether it's the usual suspects that we all know from Azerbaijan, they should come out and or try to do this inside their own society. They need to make those calls in order for us to have any space to discuss. You cannot talk to terrorist-like behavior when your people are being held as hostage, as a bargaining chip, as the ambassador has pointed out, and then go talk. What are you going to talk about? Again, I don't want to be understood wrong. I am for talking even in the worst possible situations. But the topic of discussion cannot be really constructive or tangible unless there is some kind of a solution to this hostage situation that we are all suffering here in Armenia and the Armenians in general. So I think as the sooner this happens, whether it's the international community, whether it's the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs, whether it's the Red Cross or whatever other ways there are to actually reach to this, to stop this humanitarian crisis. I mean, this is the #1 issue in the agenda, if you wish, for us. When it comes to the possibility of even talking or reconciling within our own society, I think we're in quite a crucial point, as you can tell, and I don't want to go into the domestic processes in our country, but of course there is a collective shock that our society is going through because of this war. And I think a lot of the previous, I want to say, policy or maybe general discourse is being challenged. For example, one of the largest challenges that we have now is the fact that for years, different administrations in Armenia, but not only political parties and the society as a whole, have been talking about the Armenian genocide recognition, which would become a preventive thing for Turkey so that they wouldn't attack us again. Well, this has been destroyed as a myth. I mean, the policy has been that the presidents would go to UN General Assemblies or other floors, whether it's OSCE or else, and talk about, or the European Parliament and others, and loudly talk about the importance of the genocide recognition. And again, the internal argumentation for this was, yes, if we talk about it louder, there is less chance that Turkey can do it. We see now that Turkey directly was involved in this war, supporting Azerbaijan, as mentioned, with the jihadists and other things. And it's very difficult now to rehumanize, especially at this very difficult point after when we still are finding our lost, when we don't know the real number of the dead and the losses are not clear yet, and the people are mourning and the families are going through enormous shocks. I mean, to discuss possibilities right now, how we can go for peace building is a very, very difficult manner. And I don't think it's going to be possible. It's going to be very easy to do that, even again, inside our own society. However, I have been a firm and strong believer that we do need to find ways to discuss and to negotiate things with our neighbors ourselves. Currently, as we all see, we don't have direct communication, neither with Azerbaijan nor with Turkey. It's mostly being done through Russia or by Russia. And oftentimes we are really not becoming, Armenia and in this discussion, comes out as someone who is told about the decisions rather than is part of those decision-making process. So it's a very difficult point. However, again, I believe that there needs to be some form of a ground where these discussions can take place directly on bilateral levels, whether it's with Turkey. At some point, it should happen. At some point, this needs to happen so that we can actually move forward and understand. It doesn't mean it's going to be peace. It doesn't mean that we're immediately going to reconcile. It's impossible. It's a long process. However, you need to be able to directly engage in order to be able to push for your own interests. And that's something that we have very limited possibilities to do. I don't see also, I do believe that the donor communities or the parts of the international community who have been invested in the peace building processes, whether it's the EU, whether it's the countries, states, or programs that have been done throughout these two decades, need to be revisited very seriously. We are now currently in a very different situation, in a different reality. We are also in a different struggle, a struggle that is not being mentioned very often. I mean, this war, at the time when it happened, obviously was calculated very carefully, as we all know, at the time of the COVID pandemic, at the time of the elections in the US, where nobody was going to actually relate or actively engage, especially with an administration, the Trump administration, which is now known as having a foreign policy known as the disengagement policy, which was coming out everywhere, Middle East, whether it's the South Caucasus, Middle East, or elsewhere. And so this was a very carefully calculated attack against us. But last but not least, and no less important, is that we have to link it to the democratic aspirations of our country. The Velvet Revolution of 2018 was definitely not very happily received by many in the neighborhood, including the authoritarian regimes, or mostly authoritarian regimes in and around us. Azerbaijan and Turkey are no less of that, then though they don't have, they do have quite serious issues with democracy and others, but also with one thing that is becoming, and I've been saying this, it's becoming a textbook example of a fact that in the former Soviet space, any country that is aspiring democracy has serious losses, and those losses are often territorial, and let alone, of course, the human losses that we've had, the devastating and the tragic war that we have faced. Look at Georgia, look at Ukraine, look at Moldova, look at any other former Soviet country. So these are things that need to be addressed also. These are things that need to be spoken. A very honest and frank conversation is highly needed within our own society, first of all, to also have reconsider maybe the maximalism that we have been feeding our own societies for years. When we are talking, of course, Ambassador Nersisyan rightly mentioned that Armenia itself did not consider those territories as theirs. And of course, when we were going for a comprehensive solution, those would be a part of the discussion. But the realities on the societal level is that we were not really preparing our public for that. Neither was Azerbaijan. We were not preparing our public for some kind of a compromise solution. Instead, we were going through a much more maximalist direction and talking about either I mean, it's going to be, if there is a war, we're going to just win, and that's basically, that has been the basic premise within the philosophy of consecutive administrations, except for maybe some politicians and leaders who have been openly at least stating that they have an interest in finding a solution in this conflict. I think that yeah, I'll wrap up quickly. I think this is a hypocrisy within which we've been living for years. And I think that, and I will be self-critical, first of all, obviously this was an aggression with jihadists and Turkish and Azerbaijani attacks, and that's a reality, that's a fact. However, we need to look within our own society and start a conversation where we have to shape the policies of our country and our nation, if you wish, coming from or maybe learning from the mistakes that we also have had throughout these years, and then only be able to maybe discuss some kind of a serious path to reconciliation and a relations with the region that will not be based on the conflict, but it will be trying to find solutions and maybe find ways to compromise before we can move forward.
Thank you very much, Arsen. This is just a reminder to all participants. If you would like to pose a question, please type your question into the Q&A box, which you can access at the bottom of your screen, where you can see the Zoom interface. So our last panelist, not last but not least, is Dr. Margarita Tadevosyan. She is a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Peacemaking Practice at the Carter School. She's a scholar-practitioner of conflict resolution with extensive experience of convening and facilitating Track 2 reconciliation workshops and dialogues, with a focus over the last decade now on the Georgian-South Ossetian conflict divide. But she also has plentiful experience in both analytical work and other forms of conflict resolution practice, including the Turkish-Armenian and Armenian-Azerbaijani context. So Margarita, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Laurence. And I want to thank my colleagues on the panel for laying out comprehensively what Armenian society is facing today, regionally and internally. And I would like to build on some of the point already made and not repeat what has been said. I am coming to this discussion more from a practitioner point of view, and my comments and suggestions would reflect my practical experience in this field. And I would like to note that what we are discussing today, yes, the Second Karabakh war that happened obviously is a devastating and tragic event that shook the Armenian society, not only internally in Armenia, but also the diaspora as well, including people living in the United States and elsewhere, and generated an unprecedented national response to this tragedy. And however, what I would like to speak about today is not the conversation about reconciliation with the other side, and not about how we are addressing the geopolitics of this very complex and difficult conflict that has been going on for many years, but how we can look inwards within the society and understand what type of work that it needs to be done. Obviously, the geopolitics, the previous history of the conflict, the neighbors that we have in the region are complicating all this processes, making it much more difficult to break away from the patterns that exist in the region, and to actually help people heal after this traumatic event. And it was a traumatic event. I want to kind of pick up on the point that Gevorg made about the previous victory, quote unquote victory in 1994, and how it was glorified in Armenia. Rightfully, I would say, within the context that the territorial advances that have been made at that point by the Armenian army were the only territorial gain that Armenia had in many hundreds years of history after the last independence of the country. So that was very symbolic, and the loss of the land now, the loss of the human life now, is obviously very tragic, and it is an enormous trauma for the society. However, there is, I believe as a practitioner, there is a need to find a way of understanding what peace looks like for us internally, without yet talking about reconciliation with the other side. I think there is an important component to understanding what peace will look like. And as Arsen mentioned in his remark, for many years we were not, as a society, we're not being prepared for what the peace would look like, what the coexistence would look like, and to kind of not to put all the burden on the Armenian society. I would say it was very difficult to talk about reconciliation and to talk about peace when we had evidence, and the max also very aggressive and militaristic rhetoric from the other side. As one of my colleagues, Karen Bekaran, said a couple of years ago when we're talking, as they were doing a lot of peace building and reconciliation projects, and it was under attack also in Armenia, the public was accusing this NGOs working in this field for, you are preparing or you're trying to educate doves in our society when the other society is educating hawks. So this is the dilemma that the peace building processes or peace building engagements were facing, at least internally in the country, because there was no parity in terms of the types of work that we're doing. There was a difference in obviously in the level of democratization, level of openness, or authoritarian level of authoritarianism in these countries that prevented, again, a development of sustainable reconciliation processes. However, all of the processes that were happening in Armenia, and I will not comment on what has been going on in Azerbaijan, I don't think they were built on the understanding of what peace should look like. And developing what can be called like everyday peace indicators, or like how we will know that this is the peaceful society that we're looking for. What peace will look like at the end of the day. This is something that this is the much needed work that needs to be done in Armenia. And it is, I do acknowledge that it's a very challenging endeavor, especially now when, as Laurence mentioned in his opening remarks, a lot of NGOs, a lot of civil society actors that were promoting peace, media and so on, are facing the crisis of relevance. How relevant is our work right now that that has been kind of crossed through just on the 27th of September by the military attack of Azerbaijan? However, I think there is a role for different segments of the civil society and different segments of the society to play in this conflict. In this process to bring together a discussion and a process, through that discussion, a process of healing. I don't think there should be an end goal of predetermining what the result of those discussions should be, but I think there is an important element of letting people speak about their vision of the future in order to avoid further traumatizing the next generation to come. We have seen the effects, the devastating effects of the trauma of the Armenian genocide, and that trauma actually played a role, again, rightfully, instigated by the Turkish participation or support in this Second Karabakh war. However, the trauma that Armenian people were experiencing because of the unresolved issue with the Armenian genocide and unrecognized status by the oppressor in that case, played a role in how we are viewing ourselves and how we are placing or showcasing the vulnerabilities that the society has. So I do believe that there is a role for the civil society to play in this process, and there is a role for the practitioners to come together and re-engage and restate their relevance in this process. As Arsen mentioned, there is always, even in a very dire situation, a conversation is better than flying bullets. And again, we're not talking here about an attempt to reconcile with the other side before all the necessary preconditions are there. That includes the return of the prisoners of war, that includes different types of processes, and I will and I want to kind of mention that an important component in this process is also addressing the educational aspects of it. We have done, as Gevorg mentions, we have rewritten the history textbooks. We have renamed places and gave it names. We have glorified, rightfully in many cases, heroes of war. However, it creates a close circle that does not allow us to address more deeply the type of peace that we are trying to achieve. So in this case, I guess what I want to reiterate in terms of like practitioner approach to the peace building process is having that honest conversation within our society of what do we want to achieve in future. The danger of not doing it is facing down the barrel in years to come, 20, 30, 40 years down the road, of resumed violence that will cost human lives on both sides. We will have losses in terms of economic losses, in terms of human life losses, educational, human capital, and so on and so forth. So this conversation is necessary within Armenia. That does not, again, I think one point that makes it very difficult to speak about peace building and reconciliation in the immediate aftermath of war, especially on the side that it has suffered more losses, both moral, territorial, and human, is it automatically implies in the minds of people secessions. It implies giving in. And I think there is the need to reframe the conversation that if we are trying to imagine the future or the peaceful future, it does not mean that we are stepping back from our demands, from the need to address our needs, from the need to have a comprehensive solution, from the need to have justice served in whatever form it should be, from the need for there to be international statement about the atrocities that have been committed during the war. And I think this is the fine line that a society is not ready to see, or has not been shown a way to see that difference, that the internal conversation about the peace does not diminish your role and does not—
2 minutes, please.
Does not put you on a kind of a lower position and a defeating position. I think this is the importance, and this is where the civil society has that role to play. Emphasize the need for justice, emphasize the rightful claims, emphasize the need to hold the other side accountable for the atrocities, but at the same time emphasize the need to have a conversation and to reimagine the future, a peaceful future that will not involve an eternal hatred towards the other side, and ways how there should be achieved. And it's not going to happen in very immediate future, but I think there should be a foundational work or groundwork done to address those issues. And again, this is a very complicated and complex conflict. It's not going to be solved overnight. There is a role for the international community to play. There is a role. There is a need to call things their real names if the atrocities have been committed. There is an absolute need for the prisoners of war to be returned, and in the meantime being treated in a human and humane way. However, again, we need also to have avenues and to look for structures to have an internal conversation in Armenia, what the future will look like for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margarita. So the floor is now open for questions. To ask a question, please write it in the question and answer box, which you can access through the toolbar at the bottom of the Zoom interface. We have got some questions that have already been posed. Yeah, I would just like to ask, so some of you have got your hands up. Diana Arsenyan, for example, please write your question in the box as instructed. So the first question is about the role of justice in the process. the sequencing of justice and peace, so to speak. And this kind of taps into, I think, a broader discussion. I know that my colleague Phil Gabrielyan has raised this in different platforms. The absence to date of an effective discourse around transitional justice mechanisms as they relate to the conflict. So this question is directed to you, Ambassador, but I'd also like to open it up for others to comment on. So some thoughts on the relationship between justice and peace.
Thank you very much, Mr. Broers. Frankly, I didn't understand the entire context of the question. It was in the question box because it says a justice system in Armenia. The question of justice is not about justice system in Armenia. In the context of the Nagorno-Karabakh war, the question of justice is a much broader notion about the victims that we need to address once we talk about a comprehensive and genuine resolution. Of course, the notion of justice is very important in the context of this war towards all the victims on all sides. And we do not pretend that we do not see the victims of the opposite side. We definitely, of course, see and recognize that throughout this, 30 years of conflict, there have been victims in need of justice in both sides. But this needs, as I said, to be done in a way as it takes two to tango. We cannot speak justice only for the refugees or IDPs on the one side. We have seen Azerbaijan throughout this conflict talking only its own narrative and not recognizing the justice towards the victims of, for instance, these days we are commemorating the victims of Baku and Sumgait and Kiroabad pogroms. I have never seen any Azerbaijani official talking about justice to the victims of, this bloodshed has taken place in the life of the modern Azerbaijan, and we haven't seen ever any attempt towards justice towards the victims of Baku, Kiroabad, and Sumgait pogroms and anti-Armenian massacres, or the attacks towards the Nagorno-Karabakh. The village of Maraga has been destroyed, and the peoples of Maraga have been treated in the most inhuman ways, the victims. Where is the justice towards them? So, of course, we need to talk, both sides need to talk towards the notion of justice on both sides. If we want to move forward in the direction of peace, it is very important. In the terms of genuine understanding and reconciliation, I do admit that justice plays a great role. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Would any of the other panelists like to comment on this issue of justice and how it might be sequenced with other phases in a peace process?
Just to kind of follow up to my previous point, I want to say that it would be very difficult to, the need for justice is there and it needs to be accepted and worked with. And I think here the burden lies not only on the shoulders of Armenia to try to achieve that justice, but also it is on the shoulders of international community to become the avenue for the Armenia to seek that justice, because it would be very difficult, again, in conversations with your own society, it would be very difficult for whoever will be leading these conversations to rebuttal the statements from the society, but we don't have justice for Sumgait, we don't have justice for Gurgen Markaryan, we don't have justice for shelling of the hospital in this recent war, and so on and so forth. So again, once this should be parallel processes that are happening simultaneously that would allow for more comprehensive approach. So I don't think there is a sequence per se, one should follow another, but rather they should be happening parallel, maybe like slightly one step behind, but at the same time in a parallel way.
Thank you. any other comments on the issue of justice? We have a kind of follow-up question that's appeared on the role of the International Criminal Court, and why does the international community require compromises from Armenia when we consider these various cases that have been mentioned so far, Sumgait, Kirovabad, and so on, don't see justice for those victims. Let's move on. The next question concerns the role and sentiments of diasporic communities, of the Armenian diaspora communities on the recent conflict. So it's quite a general question. Perhaps we could flesh it out. I mean, what kinds of conversation might be possible in diaspora that could facilitate processes in Armenia? And how do Armenian diaspora communities, what can they contribute to the process of healing and moving to dialogue? It's an open question for anybody on the panel.
Maybe I will catch or start from that as somebody who has been living both in Armenia and in diaspora for quite extended periods of times. I think that the one thing that we always, I always say at the very start is that there is no one diaspora. There are diasporas, if you wish, or different communities, often with contradicting interests. And that is an issue. I think it's not one whole, as it's impossible to. There are interest groups, there are well-organized political groups, there are groups that have been quite actively and are still quite actively involved in Armenia, in Armenia's life. And this war was also a very interesting indicator in that, in also learning what is the real resources of our diaspora. Is it perhaps exaggerated when it comes to war, or maybe we need to revisit how and what should be in the agenda if those diaspora groups that are interested in supporting Armenia, what should they reconsider or revisit as part of their policies. Number two, is I think the shock is also quite deep in the diaspora, as the whole nation, if you wish, those 44 days was going through a major crisis. But I think that, again, this frank conversation should be happening also between Armenia and diaspora, and that will take a lot of effort. We need to actually seriously work together if we want to have any vision of security and future prosperity of Armenia. Again, I think that there can be a very good positive role. I think the diaspora was part of this war too. And if you go back a little bit to the summer of 2020, before the attack, you will remember or see how diaspora groups, Armenians and Azerbaijani diaspora groups, were almost at a verge of war in different cities and towns, from Los Angeles to Paris to Moscow. So whether we like it or not, Armenian diaspora is part of this. And I think that there must be a more serious structural approach on how we are bringing them in a more effective and constructive way, whether it's academia, whether it's business, whether it's politics or else. Of course, Gevorg touched upon a little bit the political economy and the conflict, and I think that needs to be revisited also from the angle of diaspora. I mean, the diaspora has done enormous amount of whatever they could, I guess, and I've been a witness, but it hasn't been enough. It has not been enough, and that needs to be stated. And I think we need to, again, seriously reconsider, in fact, maybe start or find better channels of having everybody's, first of all, voice heard, but also the more constructive and the more realistic and pragmatic future that we aspire.
And if I may add, I would totally agree with Arsen's assessment that there is no one single diaspora, but we have diasporas. And I want to bring a slightly different perspective in terms of if we consider that the Armenian diaspora emerged with an inherent trauma of the genocide. I think one thing that the diaspora can bring in, or where we can learn or kind of leverage the experience, is how that enormous trauma was turned into a strong resilience point and strength in a way of developing a successful, pretty prosperous diaspora around the world, and how that knowledge can be utilized and applied in current day Armenia to help kind of to help the Armenian society grow, obviously with an understanding that diasporas are shaped also by the structures and political systems of the countries that host them. However, I do believe there is an inherent way of building resilience and resistance based on trauma, and how we can learn to kind of make that a leverage to a more prosperous future.
Thank you, Margarita. Would anybody else like to comment on the potential roles of diaspora communities? If not, let's move on to the next question. This question is addressed to Gevorg, and it concerns, you mentioned that it's crucial not to ignore or neglect societal trauma. And you mentioned that the trauma of the First Karabakh War was never recognized within Armenia. And if I understand the question correctly, it's asking whether this was to do with the fact that Armenia was on the winning side, or what are the factors that would explain why that trauma wasn't recognized? Is it only defeat after this second war that allows us to see the trauma? How do you see that issue?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not a trauma specialist. So, in fact, the Armenian society and maybe the Azerbaijani society too should be looking for a trauma specialist. But it is also difficult because people who have a trauma usually or often are against specialist intervention. They do not want to open up. But what I've seen from my own observations is that the First Karabakh War, because indeed it was construed as a victory, there was no discussion about the horrors of war. And the entire strategy, as I said, within this ethnopistic approach was built on the idea of another war. Amazing things happen. For instance, a woman writes in Facebook now, she says, when I had a child, a boy, I was so happy and I bought for him a military uniform to, like, you know, child's dress being a military uniform. And only now I understand that being a soldier, I wanted him to be a soldier, and only now I understand that being a soldier means being killed. So this entire kind of celebration of war took over a huge amount of the society. And right now it goes on in the among the opposition that is standing in somewhere in the street. The diaspora, a huge amount of the diaspora joined into the celebration of the war, that there is an eternal war. Turkey and Azerbaijan are our eternal enemies. We have to be a nation army, and that's the destiny. And as you understand, this is something that can be honestly, shared with honesty only by a few. Because why is Armenia emptying? Because people disagree with this approach. Why is it there are so many migrants? Not only because of economic issues, also because people don't want their boys to be killed in the war. And so facing the trauma means facing the reality. And as long as we shy away from that, it doesn't matter if we have won or if we have lost. As long as we shy away from the hard truth of the reality, we'll be again defenseless vis-a-vis the world events. Let's put it that way. Today is another way of shying away from trauma, covering it with discussions, for instance, about bright future, let's develop technologies, blah, blah, blah. But the war has not ended yet. As people said, people have not been left out. It's only a temporary ceasefire. The geopolitical situation is crazy. You know, what the society needs and the diaspora needs too is a very objective, balanced, serious look at the reality. The government is in many respects incapable of action. So what's going to happen? Let's put it seriously, huh? If we don't look into what is evolving, we will lose a chance of getting out of this situation with the least amount of loss. Let's put it that way.
If I could build on that a little bit and ask a kind of a follow-on question. You mentioned the nation army, Gevorg, and feelings of vulnerability around being defenseless. One of the things that I've noticed in recent weeks is a discussion about developing a garrison state in Armenia as a response to this predicament that the country now finds itself in, and that this idea is taking hold not just in, you know, perhaps oppositional circles or sort of harder line circles. It's also gaining traction amongst more liberal commentators. And I wonder if you could reflect on the viability, the scope, the appeal, and the risks of this discourse and discussion about a garrison state developing in Armenia.
I haven't heard that combination. In fact, I've only seen again and again the nation army concept, like in the old posters all over the city, even in some new posters. I haven't seen that, but obviously there is a need in defense. Nobody denies that. There is a need in defense, but it is my feeling that the more there is a talk about it, the less there is something done about it. So, yeah, and I don't think there is any liberal versus non-liberal distribution today in the society, because this trauma is such that you can see the wave, the river of changing attitudes. People who were extremely anti-liberal before the war suddenly become very liberal, and vice versa. People who were very emotional about the war because of the war now may become suddenly very, very business-minded, and vice versa. We see the change of the society, very deep and very, very thorough change. And I don't see it in a totally negative way. I think it is some very interesting process, which if the society doesn't shy away, if it is a bit more courageous to face the realities, some things may come out of that. Some important new developments may come out of that. I also do not think that it is possible to set up a pyramid-like, very strong autocratic nation army. I think that the previous times of the failure of this concept and of Ser Sargsyan's rule was also related to that it is just impossible for Armenia to have the fully autocratic version of the development. Because of geopolitics, even, it has to be open to the to the vibes, to have as many as possible relations with as many as possible actors. And that is also an impediment to setting up an autocracy or I don't know, autarky or something like that. So let me stop. I can philosophize on this a long time, so let me stop here.
If I may, just to add a couple things, I do think you're bringing up a good point, and I do think it's a real danger. I don't think we will in a very near future become super like garnison, like militaristic state in that sense. But I would say that as Gevorg mentioned, the glorification as army is real and has been real. And if you follow the current narrative in Armenia, even after the war, the popular sentiment is that army did not lose. Now people are looking for people who are guilty at the defeat, but definitely the army, the soldiers are not at fault. Like as that, the unit, the army is not under attack. What I think is missing here and has a real danger is that previously what was presented as attempts to peaceful resolution that were not extensive and were not comprehensive enough. I think people think that we gave peace a chance and it failed. And by seeing a military advantage of the Azerbaijan and attributing the victory in the war only to strong army and military capability, that drives the need of, if we gave a piece of a chance, it didn't work, even though one can argue how much genuine chance it was given to. But the second of all, the facts are there, better equipped army with much more potential. That what won the war, not the moral standing, not the truth, not the right, but this is what won the war. And I do think that we are there is a credibility to it, that if you need if they have 2 tanks, I need to have 4 in this sense.
Okay, thank you. So the next question, several speakers have suggested that despite the situation that we're in, there is some limited space for peace building in Armenia, whether this concerns long-term healing from trauma, a conversation with Armenian society, including both government and civil society, to develop strategy, seeking justice, and so on. What parts of this work can be done by civil society, and what should be done by government, and what needs to be done by both? So what is the optimal division of labor in terms of those attainable goals that we see for peace building in Armenia? What's the most appropriate division of labor between state and society? It's an open question for anyone who wishes to comment.
Well, since I raised that issue, if I may have a short comment, I think the issue is the opposite. There has been a very deep division of labor and no discussion, conversation, relationship for the entire duration of the Armenian statehood. So what we now need is to break down the division of labor, to have jointness, to have joint informal conversations, brainstormings, discussions, and building up plans. And to go for, as I said, as I tried to say, for conceptualizing the way the conflict and the issues inside the society have been construed until now, to reconceptualizing this ethnopistic approach to the history, to the conflict, to the relations with the neighbors, and finding ways to do small steps forward. The things that are not being done, it's not been easy. It's not going to be easy because it's like we are in a trench. We are in this path which has been growing stronger and stronger for 30 years. This path of conceptualizing things this way. But there are always opportunities to make 1-2 steps outside the path But for that, you need the state capacity. If you want a division of labor, the state's capacity for decision implementation, which the civil society lacks, and the civil society's capacity to open up the thinking of the state's people, to help them to become more creative. So this should be the interrelationship, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Mr. Brewers, if I may, just briefly to reflect on the role of the army and armed forces, to say that definitely, I mean, it has nothing to do with our perception of the security. It has to do exactly, I mean, the role of the armed forces. We are forced to have armed forces. We do not have an alternative given the imminent threat by Azerbaijan towards Nagorno-Karabakh and by Turkey towards Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia. So throughout these years, the Armenian threat perception has been built upon the threats exposed towards the Republic of Armenia. We have not been like, you know, in a very innocent environment trying to build up an army or armed forces. And the first Karabakh War, Armenian armed forces at the time, you know, paramilitary formations, they won in the middle of this aggression against Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia. And that's why the army building throughout the 30 years of statehood has been the important part of our statehood. So we have been facing this constant threat by Azerbaijan on a daily basis. Militancy, a threat of war to be punished, and so on and so forth. And arms race, which has been instigated by Azerbaijan. So this has been the environment in which we have been living. So that's why, you know, I, frankly speaking about this discussion, I think, again, not to throw the stone towards the other side, opposite side, but I think the Azerbaijani side that has artificially, you know, created this hate propaganda against the Armenian people has to do a similar exercise. And as I said, during the war, what we saw, the inhuman treatment by our Azeri regular army of Armenian prisoners of war, demonstrate the level of hatred, demonstrates that this is the result of 30 years of feeding its own population with militancy, with anti-Armenian hate propaganda. And the result is that we saw that, you know, in an unhidden form, what is the treatment towards the Armenians in Azerbaijan. And in this context, Azerbaijani president invites, quote unquote, genuinely the Nagorno-Karabakh people to be their own citizen. That invitation cannot be taken simply because of that type of attitude towards the Armenians and Armenianness. So therefore, whatever happened in Armenia towards the, you know, the concept of armed forces, it was the mirror reflection of the threats exposed by Azerbaijan. So that's why Armenia is supposed and has the rights and will have the right to have a, you know, to have its army and armed forces. There's no doubt. As to the role of diaspora, of course, we are thankful to the diaspora. And I here speaking personally as Armenian ambassador to the United States, of course, we're grateful to Armenian American community who has been very much helpful in doing humanitarian assistance to Armenia throughout this period. Of course, diaspora as survivors of the Armenian, as the generations of Armenian genocide survivors, they care about the modern Republic of Armenia. It's a beacon of hope for them. And of course, we appreciate very much the role of the diaspora, both here, Armenian American diaspora and Armenian diaspora worldwide. And they have had a very constructive role for the modernization of Armenia. So in the context of peace building, there are many diaspora organizations that have been doing a work in this area too, and in the reconstruction activities. So in that context, I think they have a great role to play in the coming period too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Well, we are at time. So I would like to thank each of our panelists for sharing their insights on this very important conversation. Thank you to Shayla and to Christina, to the Better Evidence Project and the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution. And finally, I'd like to thank all of the audience members for listening and for posing questions. So thanks once again. Keep well and stay safe.
Thank you to all of you for attending this event today. We do invite you to stay in touch with the Better Evidence Project to continue to have important questions like this one raised for our community. We invite you to email us at bep@gmu.edu to stay involved. And again, I would like to thank Laurence for his masterful moderation and each of our guests who joined us today. Gevorg, I believe was you who said that facing the trauma means facing the reality. And we had a very distinguished group who helped us to face just how difficult this context is. We do appreciate the opinions that you shared with us today, and we look forward to hosting a productive follow-up in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.